Welcome to the Strong Enough Podcast, your relationship wellness podcast. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to share with us how being an elite athlete affected both his friendships and 2 marriages. He's also going to talk about how injuries forced him from being an athlete to being a coach and how he keeps the same passion for his sport. Please help me in welcoming Chris Reilly. Chris, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate your time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, and it's so nice for you to have me here. I'm really pleased to be on this podcast. I think, Strong Enough is an amazing name and really, points to things that are so important in today's world and the things that we're all coping with in one way or another. So I find it a really interesting concept, and I'm anxious to hear your questions and happy to answer them.
Awesome. Well, I feel lucky to have you here, so I appreciate your time. For those people who may not be super familiar with you, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I guess, I was a professional Thai boxer living in Thailand in the late 90s and early 2000s. I'd say my biggest accomplishment still to this day is fighting in the King's birthday in 2001. I fought the number 1 ranked fighter in Rajadamnern Stadium, and I got a first-round knockout. Still to this day, now the King has passed, and obviously that fight is not the pinnacle that it was in my era, which is a little disappointing, but it was certainly the highest, best place you could fight at the time. And I'm the first and only American to accomplish that. So that's what I'm most known for. But of course, I've been doing martial arts my whole life. I started at the age of 5, had my first fight. Because, in Thai boxing, it's like everybody fights. So especially back then, it wasn't a question of whether or not you were going to do it. You just do it. After my time in Thailand, I moved home, actually because of an injury. But during that time that I was injured, I opened a gym. That gym was called the Bomb Squad. And it became very notorious in the Los Angeles area. We were very fortunate. I was right in Hollywood, and we got a lot of celebrities. And I have a background in boxing as well, because early on, when I first moved from the valley over to the city side, I obviously had to change gyms where I was training, and we looked around, and the only thing available was a boxing gym called Outlaw. And what's great about that is that it turned out to be owned by Mickey Rourke, the actor.
Wow.
Who is now one of my closest friends. We've been friends forever. But there's an old saying in the fight business that all the fighters want to be actors and all the actors want to be fighters. So that gym right away kind of put me in that mix of being, really close to a lot of the famous fighters of that time. And I was able to have them at my gym when I opened. And it started to get a very good reputation. During that time, MMA, specifically the UFC, was it had just been purchased by the Fertittas, who are the guys who really put the money in and really grew the sport. They have since sold it. But basically, it was all, or the vast majority were grapplers, wrestlers, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu players. Mm-hmm. And at that time that the sport was becoming popular, these guys were starting to realize that Thai boxing was the perfect stand-up art for them, because all of the moves in Thai boxing are legal in MMA. And so having that background was going to be a big advantage. That opened up a lot of opportunity for me, because I started to get a lot of guys at the top already in MMA coming to train with me. I think as a coach, my biggest accomplishment is coaching Quentin Rampage Jackson during his UFC career, and with his light heavyweight title win over Chuck Liddell, right at the time that Chuck Liddell was becoming this huge star. He'd just been on Entourage, he was really starting to become a mainstream star outside of the sport. And a lot of although Rampage did have a big background in Japan and had fought in Pride at the highest level, actually had beat Chuck Liddell earlier, the United States fans weren't aware for the most part, other than the real hardcore fight fans. So when we came into the UFC, no one really knew who we were. And when we walked out to that championship fight, we were walking out to boos. Rampage literally knocked him out with the first punch thrown in the fight. It was a huge upset. And then obviously Rampage is a larger than life character. Again, someone who now I consider family and one of my best friends. And we had a good working relationship for a while. I also was working with Randy Couture, who, is known as Captain America and, really big, Hall of Fame, UFC Hall of Famer, as well as Boss Rutten, who is one of the former UFC heavyweight champions and, also had a big background in Japan, like a lot of the fighters. So I was approached by Randy and Boss about starting a gym with them. And it seemed to me that it kind of made sense based on where things were going. I had a group of young fighters who were very dedicated and kind of at the time were saying they wanted to follow in my footsteps. But I was having the conversation with them about the difference in pay. And the way the sport was maturing, I thought it made a lot of sense for them to pursue MMA as opposed to Thai boxing. So, I merged with Randy and Boss. We opened a much larger, kind of really fancy studio on a prime corner lot. And that really, is where wow, I'm getting a call. I hope I'm not ruining that.
Nope,
sorry,
you're all good.
Like, or anything. Anyway, so I worked with Randy and Boss. After a couple of years, the sport grew so much that they obviously had so much financial opportunity. They weren't really participating in the gym too much. So we ended up separating on good terms, without an issue. But I had, during my Bomb Squad days, acquired Eddie Bravo in terms of having him come in and start the first 10th Planet. And that gave us the jiu-jitsu background to match with my striking background and build some athletes. And of course, we did get wrestling coaches in as well and everything. And that gym was even bigger. It was 30,000 square feet. And during this time, I also had my wife open. In the first gym, there was some extra space. And there was a separate lease. I couldn't get the landlord to include it on one. And we really didn't need the extra space. But it had a door that went through. So they were connected. And I kind of said to my wife at the time, like, if you're always in the gym anyway, why don't you start something next door? And the other thing that had happened was when we changed from being a boxing and kickboxing gym to an MMA gym. At that point, people still called the sport cage fighting.
Mm-hmm.
There was a different attitude towards it, and there were less women involved. So I lost a lot of the female clients that we had in the kickboxing program because the gym, I think, the bigger, fancier gym with the big fighters' names on it, it just kind of became intimidating. I think it was intimidating for men, but I think just less appealing for women. Mm-hmm. My wife decided to start pole dancing. And this is at a time I'd never heard of it as a sport. I mean, I know there were a couple gyms where it was kind of like play stripper for the day. Mm-hmm. But what my wife really pioneered, and my ex-wife really pioneered, she's my wife at the time, but what she really pioneered was the gymnastic, difficult tricks while still using the sex appeal and the heels and and that gym became very popular as well. So when Randy and Boss, departed as being members, and I needed a change in the lease, it just made sense to get a bigger space and leave. She'd already built the first one in the little one, but when we moved into the big one, she got a big area also. We had very high ceilings because it was a 3-story building. She got super high poles. And that kind of started a whole new era of just, again, I had a very successful fight team of some really good guys. But we had all these girls also now, and they were next door doing the pole dancing, and pretty soon, fighters were dating the pole dancers, and it was an interesting time in my life for sure. I got to a point where I got the first fighter that ever walked in and started from day one with me. I got him into the UFC, and his name is Alan Juban. He had a very good career. He's still working. He's retired just recently, but he's still working with the UFC now as a commentator. And I had been under so much pressure, to be honest, to be dealing with 2 separate businesses in one building, an extraordinary number of students, an extraordinary number of fighters training with me, and the relationship was really under strain. And so I was able to sell Legends, and that was a nice exit for me at the time. And I think until very recently, for some people, was like seen as like an exit from the sport and an exit from the business. And I did take a few years off, and I kind of pursued my DJing thing, which is really a hobby, but something I thought, well, let me do before I'm really too old to be, doing this anymore. I wish I did for a couple of years, and I had a little bit of success and played a couple of big shows, and it was fun, but I gained weight, and I had anxiety issues, and I think probably depression. Not sure I really realized it, but thinking back, and it just kind of became clear to me that I needed to get back into the sport. All of a sudden COVID hit. So while COVID hit, I have a friend who has his own gym, and we go back at least 20 years, if not more, to what was the first Thai boxing gym in the United States. It's known as MTA, Muay Thai Academy. It was started in 1971. And I started there very young because I happened to be born in the nearby area. But this friend of mine was willing to let me use his gym for private lessons. And so I was able to go in when it was closed, not be exposed to a bunch of other people during COVID. And I started working again with this fighter. His name is Charles Facette, by the way. He's a 5-time world champion. We're looking at, another title fight on September 18th that he'll be doing. And then hopefully I'll have him on my promotion within the next couple months after that. But I was working with him, and then I started to add some students. And that really started to help in terms of how I felt on a daily basis and what I was dealing with in terms of my emotional health and my physical health. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. The gym is reopened. It's called Defiant Muay Thai. It belongs to a very close friend of mine, Daniel Gutierrez, also an excellent fighter, long history, good coach. There's also some other really good coaches in there. I work with the boxing coach who has a children's program. And he's got like 8 to 10-year-olds. And it's so great for me to get to participate in that. It's his program. He runs it, but he allows me to help and work with the kids. And since I was in their shoes that time in my life, I feel like I kind of understand. I understand the rough days and the days where you're not doing as well, and how much pressure that can be on kids, and the parents are usually there watching. So I have been having a lot of fun with that, having a lot of fun building some young kids that would like to fight, would like to be fighters, and then obviously working with my light heavyweight, who's a highly accomplished fighter. That's filling out my time right now. And, but I'm feeling good, I'm feeling good about it, and I'm enjoying it. I guess through this, I missed that, the promotion that I've now partnered up with, is actually the longest continuously running combat sports, program in the United States. And I was their champion in 2003. So that was the title I think I mentioned I won after recovering from my broken arm. I also beat a fighter named William Striapai, who's a very accomplished fighter, both in Thai boxing and in MMA. So it's just, because a lot of times you can win a title belt, but to me, it's a lot about who did you beat. That's what really kind of validates the value of the belt, at least from where I stand. So I have those 2 accomplishments, and I'm now back in a gym. It's not my own. I have considered opening my own, but right now I have kind of all the freedoms of having your own gym without any other responsibilities. And I think it is kind of a natural progression. I was a fighter. I was a coach and a gym owner, manager of my fighters while I was coaching them. And so now we get to move into promoting. It seems like the right step and the natural step. And there are a lot of challenges because, as you know, technology is changing everything. And so trying to keep up with that and, move this promotion, which, again, longest running in North America, has had all the best fighters in the world on it competing, but has not had a lot of digital exposure because the owner he's older than I am, and he's busy doing the matchmaking and the venue relationships and making sure the hard tickets are selling. So, my role to a large extent is going to be, getting this up on pay-per-view and making that pay-per-view successful by growing our social media. None of which is my expertise, to be honest, but, I'm learning on the way and using my knowledge of the sport, having been in it my whole life, to, try to merge those two. Help give the information to the guys that we're trying to, hire to help us with all those technical aspects. But I see a huge opportunity in it, to be honest. I think there's no reason why Thai boxing should not be right there with boxing and MMA in terms of the combat sports that the world watches, specifically the American market, obviously. So I think there's huge potential. I'm really excited about it. And I'm getting to do that while still being in the gym and still being a part of, the combat sports-ish part of it, and trying to keep myself healthy and fit as possible as, the clock keeps working against me.
Why does it do that to us? So you left me here with so many questions, but I want to backtrack a little bit to when you were a fighter. First off, you said you started about the age of 5. What led you to do that? What was your interest in martial arts at the age of 5?
It's a great story because basically, as I said, we lived in the area near this gym. And my mom says that I would point at it from my car seat by the time I was 2. And so she would stop and take me in. 5 was their minimum age. That was the lowest age they took anyone in. And literally from the time I was 2 until I think I was about 4.5, actually, I'd been coming in and watching for so long that when I was not yet quite 5, but old enough to join the class, I guess. And I never stopped doing it. And no one really knows. My brother, I have a younger brother who's 3 years younger than me, also trained for a long time. He's had a couple fights. I think he is a little brighter than I am because he went to business school and got into private equity. So he didn't pursue it on a professional level, but he has actually fought. He also was a Division I wrestler in college. So, and I played a lot of football. I didn't want to diversify too much, but I was a really good football player for my size. I just hit a point where I couldn't continue because it's a sport where that's one of the things I love about fighting, by the way, is the weight class setup allows anyone who really wants to compete. And really to keep doing it for quite a long time, as long as you're matched properly. Obviously we saw Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. recently. They're both over 50, but they were still able to get in there and entertain us, and that was kind of cool. And while I don't recommend that for most people, obviously, more like I said, the fact that when you go in there, that you're fighting someone your exact size, and hopefully, you've got the people, in your corner to make sure that you're properly matched in terms of experience. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for a lot of athletes who just, size-wise would not be able to compete in football or basketball or even tennis and volleyball these days, even soccer. I mean, the guys are big, so, you can be 110 pounds, 115 pounds, 118 pounds, and, they've got a division for you. And I think that's really cool.
First, I want to say I would love to be 118 pounds, but that's another story. I do want to talk to you about growing up as an elite athlete, because we were talking earlier about us being cut from the same cloth. I started running when I was 3 years old and was very competitive by the time I was 8 or 9. So I understand that drive and that focus. How do you feel like that affected your friendships, relationships? Because you were really putting everything into your fighting, which I have no issue with. I think it's great. But how do you think that affected relationships in your life?
Well, tremendously is the short answer. And then I'll elaborate a little bit. As a kid, especially during the time period that I was growing up, there were very few other kids doing this. And then, as the time I got into high school, I was captain of the football team. And so initially, it really promoted relationships and I guess what you would call popularity. And so it felt very gratifying on that level. Now, I did go to college and spent 4 years doing that. And when I was there, I played rugby, and I played rugby at a very elite level. I was an All-American. And, same thing, kind of one of the team leaders and highest scorers. And that was a big group of guys. The way rugby works, they have an A team, a B team, and a C team. And there's 15 guys on the field at a time. So you basically got 45, players every weekend. And then obviously you need other guys for subs for injuries and stuff like that. So, you're talking about 50, 60 guys that are really like close-knit family that are traveling to games every weekend and, or playing at home. And, so in my younger years, I really felt like it was a positive effect on my relationships. After college, I got a job and I worked for a short period of time in a good, regular job. I won't even get into what it was, but I was fortunate. I had a good job and it was well paying for that, period in my life. But I was miserable, to be honest. I'm not someone who can, and it wasn't 9 to 5, it was like 6 to 8, So, getting up and driving downtown in traffic and sitting in a building with no windows, working at a desk and with a phone, trying to make sales. While it was financially rewarding, it was, again, very stressful. I ended up being very unhappy. And also at that point in time, I was not mature enough to say, this isn't working for me. I need to leave. And I just kind of blew it up, to be honest. I just kind of, started making errors and mistakes and coming in late. And, I didn't exactly get fired, but I got to the point where I could tell they wanted to fire me, and then I just kind of bounced, Obviously that's, I try not to live with regrets, but I mean, if I could go back and that's one thing I would do, differently, I would be, able to give 2 weeks notice and explain as to why it wasn't working for me. But after leaving that job, it took me a very short period of time. I was back in the gym because that was always the place that was comfortable for me. And I reached a point with all the experience that I had growing up. I reached a point where I felt like in order to get any higher level training, I really was going to have to go to Thailand. And at that point, they didn't have gyms that were built for foreigners the way they do now. It was really, Thai boxing in Thailand is really about gambling. It's not about the fighters. It's not about creating superstars. It's about evenly matching fighters so that you can get the most people gambling on the sport. Therefore, they weren't really that interested in foreigners. It just didn't really make sense to them. So, I really had to go and, pay my dues and, prove myself in that setting. And I was at a very well-known gym, a very famous gym. One that was very difficult for a foreigner, a phalang, as they call them in Thailand, to participate. And so, I went and did that. I got in there and I slept at the gym on a straw, futon, a very thin, futon with a mosquito net over it.
Wow.
And I remember when I was first kind of starting to just get conversational, the kids in the gym, and I say kids because they generally do start a lot younger there. They would just look at me and they would say, "Chris, why? Why?" Because there, generally fighters are fighting for food for their families. It's really a life or death kind of thing. Like I need to do this in order to keep my family eating. It's not wow, I'm going to be a big star. Of course, those guys are created out of the system. They do have big stars, and that happens. But that's not the main purpose of the gym or of the promoters. It's more about keeping, constantly new or exciting guys in the ring to promote the gambling, which is where the money's made. And anyone who hasn't been there, who has an interest in the sport, needs to take a trip, and they need to go to Rajadamnern Stadium. That's the big stadium in Thailand. It's kind of funny because Lumpini is more famous, and more people outside of Thailand have heard of Lumpini. And Lumpini Stadium was amazing. Unfortunately, it's been closed. But when I was there, it was the last mega promoter. There hasn't been another mega promoter since Songchai. And Songchai was the equivalent of Don King here in boxing. Big personality, very powerful. And he controlled Rajadamnern. So during my time there, Rajadamnern was really the main place and the place you wanted to fight. I did get to fight in both stadiums while I was there, which was really cool and a really cool accomplishment. But Rajadamnern was definitely the place. But in either case, the stadiums are just insane because everyone there is gambling. And you would see the bookies literally with, the small, this was the era of the small cell phone. And they would have 4 or 5 cell phones taped to their hand because they'd be calling in bets from people who are watching on TV. And then the guys making the actual bets there in the stadium. I mean, it's not like you just pick a fighter and you bet on him. You can bet on rounds. You also, every time something happens during the fight, the odds change. So let's say I'm going into a fight and I'm a 2-1 favorite against the guy. But as the fight starts, he lands a hard kick or a hard combination on me. The odds can instantly shift now to him being the 2-1 favorite, and guys can place new bets or replace bets. And this happens all the way during the fight, and the guys are pointing at each other and they're keeping track of them. And it's amazing how it's basically what the stock market looked like. What you see at the stock market, especially in the early days when we didn't have all the computers and everything, that guys with tickets yelling at each other and saying, "Oh, I'll buy this and I'll buy that." It's that same level of action while a real full contact fight is going on, where, literally, your life is on the line in there. It's something that people don't really like to talk about a lot, but, there are a significant number, to me, a significant number. I don't want to put an exact number on it, but I've heard between 8 and 16 people that die every year doing this. So, you got that kind of level of intensity happening. You can see the head gamblers going to the corner and actually giving advice to the coaches and cornermen. That's how powerful some of these big gamblers are. But it's really an insane amount of activity and action, and something I think everybody should get a chance to see. Not to mention that Thailand is just a beautiful place and a great country to visit. It's just amazing for tourism. But yeah, I think that action and that activity really fed my competitive spirit. And I did become so focused. I also had the issue of, for the most part, Thais tend to be smaller. And so in order to really be in the action, I had to lose as much weight as possible. I mean, I was skin and bones when I was fighting there. I fought at 147 in the King's birthday. And then I immediately fought a Putong in Cambodia just 30 days after at 145. We had a very close fight. He won the decision, but I felt like it was a hometown decision. And of course, I immediately wanted a rematch. So I went back and fought him again 30 days later. So in 90 days, I had 3 fights at the highest level possible. And of course, in that rematch against A Putong, he did break my arm. He broke my left arm with a right kick. And that's what he's known for, was his most powerful kicking. I don't think it was out of toughness, to be honest. I think I was in shock. But I remember real quickly in my head saying, fuck, he just broke my arm. And then I never thought about it again. I finished the fight. I lost again. I tried desperately to get the television copies from the promoters. They would not give them to us. So, I wish I had those fights on tape, because, I feel like, well, I didn't get the decision. I won the fights.
Right.
But either way, when the second fight was over, I'm back in the locker room, and my coach goes to cut the hand wraps off. And as he puts the tape into the broken one, I go, no. And he's like, he doesn't have any idea that I've broken my hand. That's how I got through that fight without even my corner knowing. And I just passed out. And I woke up in an ambulance on the way to a hospital in Cambodia. Luckily, I had a good friend. I met a young Swedish kid his name is Peter Neeland, and he also has pretty much all the same accomplishments that I have in the sport. He's just very humble and, has never promoted himself. But I met him because we were fighting on the same cards. Then I brought him to our gym in Thailand. And then when I opened the bomb squad, I flew him over to the US. I paid for his visa. I was able to get him an athlete's visa. Kind of a little quick funny story on that is, like I said, I had all these high-level boxing connections kind of through my original, joining Outlaw and working with those guys. So when I applied for his athlete's visa, I had all of them write him a letter. And I also had a attorney who did this, right? And the attorney was really hard on us, saying, like, you need all this stuff and you need all this paperwork and it's going to be really difficult. And, I can't guarantee it. And we submitted the visa, and he called us 2 hours later. He said it was the fastest visa he's ever seen approved. Because obviously whoever it went to was a fight fan. That person knew, I had Michael Bent, who was a former heavyweight champion. I had Frankie Lyles, who, actually, was a roommate of mine back in the day. He was the WBA super welterweight champion, super middleweight champion for a good 8 to 10 years. And people inside the boxing community say he's maybe the best super middleweight ever. And I know he beat Roy Jones Jr. consistently in the amateurs. They still took Roy Jones to the Olympics, which was a real heartbreaker for Frankie, because Roy had the more exciting style with all of his unorthodox stuff. But inside the fight game, people say Roy Jones made a living avoiding Frankie Lyles because he moved up to 175 to be a weight class higher and would never give Frankie a fight. And but I learned a lot from Frankie Lyles specifically. I would say that even with all the knowledge I had from 5 until, whatever. I mean, I haven't stopped learning today, but during my fight career, Frankie taught me a lot about balance and biomechanics and things that honestly in Thailand, were not really taught. But what really helped me was I was able to take those lessons, as well as obviously getting my hands together at a higher level. I was able to use the knowledge of biomechanics and how your body works and how your footwork should be to really improve my Thai boxing game. And that was late in my career for me as a fighter, but I think it really made me a much better coach. And it's one of the things I'm really kind of proud of. I want to be humble, and I don't want to, sound cocky or arrogant. And it's why I like to make sure I attribute the skills that I learned to the guys that obviously my trainer in Thailand taught me an incredible amount about, not only using the knees and the clinch and, other stuff that is, not taught as often here, frankly. But, he taught me about mental toughness and about, facing competitors on a consistent level and how to stay healthy and how to, do that. Obviously I got through a lot of fights there in order to be able to fight in the King's Birthday. And then, yes, I think I was a little reckless afterwards with just, going straight for the next toughest guy I could get. And I did get the broken arm, but, that was after 3 years in Thailand and a lot of fights and a lot of victories and being able to, being picked to fight in the King's Birthday at that time was something that was very difficult and something that I dreamed about coming up as a fighter. We used to go to Thai Town and they had a video store where people from Thailand shipped back basically everything that was on TV so that our Thai community here could watch their own TV. And we used to go there and buy all the fights. And obviously what I liked watching most out of all those fights was the King's Birthday every year because it's held in Sunam Long Park, which is like the equivalent of Central Park in New York, because there's no stadium big enough to hold all the people that come. There's generally considered to be about 100,000 people there watching the fight, which was insane, as you can imagine, fighting in front of that many people. And it's always kind of known for having the best foreigners fight the best Thais. Whereas, like I said, there wasn't a lot of that happening in the regular stadium fights and some of the other TV, channel fights in places. Here, they brought fighters internationally from everywhere. And while I was there already and living there, I was still American and still able to, represent America while representing my gym in Thailand. But yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot there, obviously, and I have a tremendous amount of appreciation and respect for what I was taught there. But, the boxing training that I got here in America, and specifically, especially from Frankie Lyles, who really broke it down in a scientific way that I could make sense of and therefore apply not just to boxing, but to my knees and kicks and clinch and everything else. It really helps me as a coach. And I think I'm, really well prepared at this point. And obviously I have built fighters from day one. I mentioned Alan because he's the one that made it to the UFC, but there are a fair number of guys that really should have also gotten into the UFC. Alan was a model. and he'd been a Versace model, and he'd been on billboards for Equinox. So he was the easiest, most marketable guy to get in. But there were quite a few other guys under me who had equal amount of skills and have fought in high level shows. And I'm very proud of doing that and having that accomplishment. And then, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the transition from fighting to coaching. I know that you went through a couple different injuries, and that kind of led in some way to you making that transition. So I know that there are a lot of things that can cause us as human beings to not be able to do the things physically that we want to be able to do. So whether that's an injury or a chronic illness or whatever it could be, how did that affect you mentally to have your body kind of let you down in a way?
Well, I think the answer is that at the time of the injury, okay, and yes, I had the broken arm, and then, I also had a broken leg later. So, I kept trying to fight through these injuries. But during that time, it was an awakening in a sense that this isn't going to last forever. And I need to do something else. And the something else that made sense was to open a gym. And, honestly, at the beginning, opening the gym, I didn't spend a lot of time coaching. I brought Peter over, who, had all the same training and all the experience that I did. And he mostly handled the class. And yes, I did start working with some of the, MMA athletes because that made sense. And they were seeking me out personally because I had just returned from winning this fight in the King's birthday. And I kind of had, a status at the moment. But again, I was still trying to fight, which is how I got through the broken arm, and then, did win a title after that, on a very well-known and established promotion. Also went to Australia as well as to Turkey several times and fought in both those places. But yes, as my body was wearing down from the battles, it was becoming more and more clear that if I wanted to stay involved in the sport, it was going to be more as a coach than as a fighter. I think, to be honest, initially it was surprisingly rewarding, and I really didn't miss the fighting as much as I thought I would. I really enjoyed getting the chance to transfer the skills that I had into younger, hungrier, ready to go, able bodies and watch them grow and progress. And it kind of became my new passion. I think, I didn't fully answer your last question in terms of how fighting affected my relationships because I got caught up in telling you my stories. But the reality is, yes, all of this takes an incredible amount of focus, and it's very difficult to maintain really any kind of close personal relationships. I am lucky to have some really good friends from long periods of time. My best friend is from the 10th grade. So I'm sorry, from the 5th grade. So when we were 10. So, luckily he doesn't let me escape. Like, he calls me and says, yo, we haven't talked in a year. What's going on? And obviously I have a tremendous amount of love for him for that. And I have another group of guys that Sorry, I should drink some water here.
It's important to stay hydrated.
I know, right? Yeah. I have another group of guys that, I go back 20, 25, 30 years with. I was just on the phone with one of them last night, talking about going out. I had another one here in town from Vegas, and I'm hoping that he's still here and I get to see him. But this weekend has been so insane that it's just been impossible. Mm-hmm. And that's an example of where relationships can break down. Now, the relationships I just mentioned are all with guys who all have their own lives. Most are married now. Most have kids. I don't have that because, both of the marriages that I've had did end up failing, end up not working out. And while I wouldn't attribute that solely to my career or my focus, there's no question that I think it was probably hard to have a committed, intimate relationship with me when, every morning I was getting up at 5:30 and running, 10 miles and then, taking a nap, and then getting back to the gym in the afternoon for training, coming home, taking another nap, going back to the gym in the evening. And then by the time that's over, really all I have time or energy for is laying in bed and watching Netflix. I did not necessarily make the best life partner during that time. And if you want to achieve excellence, you are going to have to make sacrifices in life. I think, that there's no exceptions in that. What those sacrifices are might be different. I'm not saying there aren't excellent elite athletes with, good, marital relationships, but I guarantee you there's another area of their life that's sacrificing. And I think we've seen recently a lot of top athletes starting to come out and talk about, mental health issues. Because the ones who really are able to keep it all going, there's so much pressure in that eventually it is going to start to break you down mentally, and either something or all of it is going to fall apart.
Would you say that you have any regrets in having those marriages? Like, if you had it to do over again, would you change what you did as a fighter and that focus, knowing that you might have to sacrifice some of that greatness for a better relationship? Or did everything work out the way it should have?
The truth is, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like, it is a human condition to want it all. And so it's difficult for me to answer that question because, I don't necessarily regret the failed relationships, because again, I don't believe they were solely about my focus and attention. And I do believe I now currently am capable. I am in a very committed relationship with someone I've been with for a very long time, and we're very happy. And so to say I would regret, those, especially if it meant not having the achievements that I've had. Frankly, if I didn't have the achievements in the sport of Thai boxing that I've had, I have no idea what my life would look like. So, I try really hard not to think about regrets, and just to be aware that, whenever you want anything difficult, whenever you want anything special, anything above what, is And I hate to even use the word average life, because I don't think anyone's life is average. Everybody has their challenges. Everybody has their struggles. I understand that. But again, when you're talking about elite, you're talking about athletes, talking about people trying to accomplish things above and beyond what even other people in their field are accomplishing. There is a tremendous amount of pressure there, requires a tremendous amount of focus. And my belief is still that if you want to do something like that, your primary focus has to be the craft. You have to continue working on the craft. You have to keep sharpening the craft, and then kind of trust that what comes of that are going to be the things that you hoped you had in your life.
Having been through 2 divorces, what are your thoughts right now on marriage?
Again, I guess I can only speak for myself, but of course I do have, a fair amount of male buddies and male guys around. I think most of us tend to get married because, I think our society really trains women to have this kind of dream of this big day and this special day. And I'm not sure that's so true for the way men are raised in our society. So, again, the specifics of a marriage. I mean, do I need the state to give me a license to live with someone? I mean, to me is insane. And by the way, you can do it very quickly and very cheaply. Wait till you have to undo it.
Right.
Right. So, I'm not a huge fan of the legal marriage concept anymore. I think it's a very outdated concept personally. Again, not to knock anyone who wants it or who that's important for, that's fine. But I think the short answer to that question is, again, I do have a relationship now with a woman who I love and who I want to be happy. I guess it's going to kind of come down to how she feels about it, because it is important to me at this point to have a life partner and to not have us fail a third time. So I'm going to do what it is she wants to do. But it's not like I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get married. We got to go get married and, spend X amount of dollars on one day to, have a big party for all our friends. And that just doesn't seem, an important part of what makes a lasting relationship, in my opinion.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I want to ask you a little bit about coaching. You talked about Rampage earlier. I love him. Amazing fighter. And as you mentioned, very big personality.
Yes.
Definitely larger than life. So how is it to work with somebody like him versus working with somebody who is, maybe newer to the sport or up and coming, not quite there yet? What are the different challenges that you experience in those relationships?
Well, first of all, no fighter likes to hear about their disappointments, but I do have to point out that at the time I began coaching Rampage, he had just been knocked out twice very badly by Vanderlei Silva in Pride. And a lot of people were saying he was done. I didn't believe that. I thought he just needed a better skill set, frankly. I don't believe that, the coaches he was working with at that time were doing that for him. Not even to criticize them in any way, because I don't know what they had going on. I don't know what, I do know who he was working with before. And I think that coach has been very successful and has had a lot of fighters. So, last thing I want to do is make it sound like, but the situation was what the situation was, and I believed I could help him. I don't think he has ever taken a clean, hard shot from anybody since in his entire career. So that's something I kind of take a lot of pride in. And then, like I said, bringing him into the UFC where he really wasn't known, the fans were not aware of who he was, and kind of almost instantaneously turning him into the biggest star in the sport at the time. I mean, it was the pinnacle of MMA. I am very appreciative of Rampage for trusting in me and bringing me on that way. We've remained incredibly close friends. He came to my first promotion a couple weeks ago and, participated in getting up in the ring and supporting what I'm doing now. I think he's, really one of the best human beings on the planet, as well as having, an incredible sense of humor and being a, extraordinary killing machine when it comes time. There's a lot to that, there's a lot there, and there's a lot of things about his personal life that, I would not bring up, but I would say extend even further what an incredible person he is and what an incredible human being he is. I mean, the fact that he's raised the children that he's raised through all those difficult periods that we already talked about in terms of how difficult personal relationships are and all that stuff. He was always there as a father. He was always providing for his kids. He was always spending time with his kids. They would come to camp when we'd do camp in Big Bear Lot. The kids would be there. They're now basically grown. One of them is, I know, working on pursuing MMA, and that's a heavy mantle to carry on your shoulders, right? But yeah, he's an amazing human being. There were definitely challenges working with someone that high level because there are always other people involved. There are always other people in someone's ear who's at that level. And frankly, I don't have the bandwidth to be hip to hip with any one guy, regardless of how much money they're making as a fighter or what kind of status it's bringing me. Like I said, I always wanted to develop my own guys and my own team and was working on that. The gratifying part about working with your own kids is they're your own. You've shown them exactly how to do it from the beginning, the way you believe is the right way, because, they call boxing the sweet science, and, regardless of what type of fighting you're doing, there is some science to it. There are some things that are just right and some things that are just wrong. But there also are called martial arts. And boxing is a martial art, just like any of the Asian martial arts that it's a combat art form. And as we know, art generally, well, again, I believe there are some rules to art. I wouldn't consider myself an artist, but if you go to be like a fine painter, you do have to learn proportions and how to create certain things, dimension, and all of that. But then after that, it's about creativity and it's about freedom of expression. So there is everybody has their own way of doing things, and there's not necessarily a right and wrong one after you get through a certain set of skills. So having my own team brought up under me, doing things my way, and able to really not have outside influences pushing or changing, or, which would cause me to have to, battle someone else while still trying to, give the knowledge that I believed was what they really needed. As well as all the other things like money and, where they should fight and what fights they should take. But I do have to say that after a certain number of years, the number of fighters that I took on and the amount of time and energy that I was spending on them became very overwhelming for me mentally. And then it also started to break down my body because I was doing all the kick pads for all of them. And because I never let go of the fighting mentality, I was in there sparring with all of them. Everyone from Rampage and, all the high level guys at that time I was in the ring with, sparring, dealing with the takedowns and the jiu-jitsu and learning how to sprawl and stay on my feet. Cause that obviously everybody wanted to take me down. I was doing all of that while coaching a bunch of guys and then managing them too. Bringing them up through the amateurs, deciding when they were ready to turn pro, finding fights for them at the pro level, because my guys did have a fair amount of amateur fights, which is not always done in MMA. So in the early stages, it was very difficult, because I'd have a guy who was 0-0 as a pro. But everybody had seen him fighting in Tough Enough 10 or 15 times. And frankly, Tough Enough, which was the big amateur show in Vegas where Dana White regularly attended, other people involved in the UFC were there. Those fights were probably on a higher level than a lot of the pro shows that might exist around the country at a smaller level. So, it might have been a mistake on my part to keep my guys amateur as long as I did, because A, I did start to burn out after so long, and B, they did have some trouble getting matched up early, which may have held some of the other guys out of the UFC when they really deserved to be there. But again, we're all learning. And I have to accept that, what I have accomplished as a coach was still a learning experience. I often like to think of Mike Tyson and Cus D'Amato. I believe Cus D'Amato was 70 years old when he met Mike Tyson at 13 and basically took him in. And, Cus D'Amato is now well regarded as, a master of the sport. But it still took him until he was 70 to find his vessel that he could really pour all of that knowledge into and turn into an incredible superstar. And unfortunately, he didn't even live. He died just before Tyson won the heavyweight title and became the youngest heavyweight champion ever. So, I still have time left, and I have, no idea what, and that's the other part of coaching. You have no idea whether you're going to find, the guy, because, you can give somebody all the knowledge in the world, but let's face it, sports are sports. And if you don't have the certain athletic ability, you're just not going to be able to compete at a certain level. I think we're seeing that, primarily with John Jones right now. There are other guys, but I think John Jones is a perfect example of a guy who's come in to the UFC at a young age. So frankly, with a limited skill set at the time, but his athleticism is just so high compared to the other guys fighting that he's been able to really dominate the sport, even through the struggles that he's had that I don't really want to bring up. They're all famous. They're all known. They're all out there. But yet he continues to win and continues to stay on top. And I think, it's only a matter of time until we start to see, MMA become all guys like that. It's starting to, produce the type of revenue that is going to bring athletes who might have otherwise been in the NBA or the NFL. Like I said, the good news is we will still always have the weight classes. And so there will always be the opportunities for guys at the lower levels. That doesn't mean their need for athleticism is going to decrease. It just means that, you're not going to have to be supersized to fight. Right. But yeah, I think, I'm learning as a coach, even though I've been doing it for close to 20 years now. And I feel like I have a lot of experience and a lot to offer fighters. I have to learn to coach in a different way because I can't be as physical with them as I was with, say, the first group I took on. So I have to change how I'm doing things. I have to work with some of my friends that I was talking about who are younger than I am and can do some of the pad work for me and do some of the training. So I have to learn to be a little bit more of a team player, which, I wasn't doing with my first group, frankly, because of the experiences I had during the time I was coaching Rampage. I really didn't want anyone else involved. And while there's some really nice things about having control, you're sacrificing what other people could bring to the program, the other positives that they could bring that you may not have. And so learning how to accept that and welcome that, but also maintain a firm boundary where you're not losing control over the people you've put time and energy into, and you're not seeing them, learning the wrong things or listening to the wrong people who may not necessarily have the best motives in terms of getting involved with guys once they start showing, a certain level of talent or experience. Those are my challenges to juggle career-wise moving forward. And that's an interesting experience for me because I think, again, that, the managing relationships while trying to stay focused and have the time and the energy to put, whether it was into myself as a fighter or into fighters that I'm working with, that level of intensity really has not changed for me. So, that's kind of where I'm at right now. And, every day's a new day and a new experience. And, I try to roll with the punches as best I can. And I give a lot of thanks to this sport and what it's done for me in my life, throughout my life. And I try to remember whenever things get rough or, whenever I'm super tired and I don't want to go to the gym, or, whenever I've got some other area of my life that needs attention and requires attention is taking me away. I just try to remember that, like I said earlier, the most important part is the craft. And so regardless of whether or not I'm competing anymore, I can't afford to stop learning. Because if I stop learning, other coaches are going to surpass me. And so while I'm not getting in the ring and competing anymore, I'm now competing with other coaches out there to learn as much as I can, stay current with which all sports evolve. So, it's like if you look at the NBA in the 70s or the 80s, you don't see the same kind of play that you see now. Right. And I think that's true of all sports. And so I think one of the biggest traps that I see some coaches fall into is starting to feel like they've learned everything. They know the right way to do everything. And that's an easy trap to fall into when you have 30, 40, however many years it is of experience. But they're just like in sport, just like as a competitor and an athlete, there are always going to be young guys nipping at your heels. And I'm seeing new gyms pop up right now. I'm seeing new instructors who I'm not familiar with. I'm not aware of their history. They may actually be really good coaches, or they may be guys who want to be good coaches and had the money to open a gym. So, you got to kind of be aware of that, and you got to kind of see what's happening and what other people are doing and find ways to keep up and to continue pressing yourself to be the best you can be at whatever it is you're doing.
I would love for you to throw out your number one piece of relationship advice, and that can be personal relationship, friendships, whatever you think is number one in your mind.
I think what's number one in my mind, maybe because it's the most challenging for me, but I think it's really important to listen to the person whom you're in a relationship with and really think about and try to make sure you're interpreting what they're saying so that you can do your part to meet their needs. And again, boundaries have to be set because you can only go so far. You can't fix anyone. You can't, make everyone's life perfect. Which is not necessarily my problem, but I see that. I see other people struggle with that. I think my problem can often be the opposite because I'm so focused, again, on my craft and on honing it. I maybe don't always pay the best attention to what the other person's needs are, and then decide how to address them so that they do feel like I'm there for them in whatever capacity is appropriate. And while doing that, to maintain a boundary so that it doesn't become overwhelming for me to where I then just blow up the relationship because I can't handle it, which I have done in my past. And, again, I don't like to call it a regret because things work out the way they work out, but I would say I would do it differently if I had the chance with the knowledge and wisdom I've gained through age and time.
Mostly just time, because not age. So I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I want to wrap up with a little bit of tattoo talk. As you know, I love tattoos. I have a bunch of tattoos. I'm planning my next 4 tattoos.
Oh, wow.
It's a process, but I would love to hear your most meaningful tattoo that you have.
Oof.
This might be the toughest question, right?
Yeah, it's 100% the toughest question because every tattoo I have is meaningful. I think I'm going to go with Bloodsport, which was done by Mark Mahoney. He's very famous. He has Shamrock tattoo right on the Sunset Strip. I had Mickey Rourke get me an appointment with him. He's known for his script. So I have his scripts and I have the words Bloodsport tattooed on my left breast. And, there's no doubt that watching that movie as a young child while being involved in the sport, I think obviously directed a huge portion of my life. And, I actually spent some time training with Paulo Tosha, who played the Thai boxer in the movie Bloodsport. And while he was on that set working, he told the people making the movie that the fighting we were seeing in Bloodsport was not real. And they were all shocked because I guess the guy who wrote the script was advertising it as if this was his real life. And you probably don't remember this, but the end of the movie, it says, and I shouldn't blow up the guy's name since I'm dogging him out right now, but the character played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, it says he went on to, retire with an undefeated record of 700, or I can't remember the exact number, but it was an impossible number of fights to have.
Right.
And it's certainly an impossible number to be undefeated at. Right. And, Paolo took the filmmakers to Thailand because they were filming in Hong Kong, the Bloodsport. He brought them to Thailand and showed them Thai boxing and said, look, this is the closest thing to what you're trying to portray here. And that led to the movie Kickboxer, which was the follow-up to Bloodsport. And it's where Jean-Claude Van Damme goes to Thailand and his older brother is beaten up and his older brother is played by Dennis Alexio, who was a famous American kickboxer here, who I admired as a kid growing up. And that brother is severely hurt by the character Tong Po. After that, the movie again goes a little, outside the realm of. But one interesting little note is that part of it is when Jean-Claude Van Damme decides he's going to train to fight Tong Po, he does go to the Thai boxing gyms originally, and he goes into my actual gym where I lived and fought out of. And he says, I want you to train me. And he points to the poster of Tong Po on the wall. And all the kids in the gym laugh him out of the gym. And when I went there, obviously many years later, to train, the other fighters my age fighting, as well as the trainers, had the video cassette of Kickboxer, and they would put it in the TV to show me that they were in the movie. And I would see the actual gym where I was training, as well as the guys I was training with in this little spot in the movie. And, the truth is I owe Paulo Tosha a lot of, a lot of respect and appreciation for that connection, and also for the fact that he, as his character in Bloodsport, really brought Thai boxing to America in a big way. I would like to talk briefly about my promotion that I have, if we have some time. As I said, it's the longest continuously running fight promotion in North America. So we just had our 30th anniversary fight a couple weeks ago. It was sold out. We had amazing fights. The Instagram is at WCK Muay Thai. You can see clips of the fights there. And our next event is September 25th. I'm going to grab my notes real quick.
I love it.
If you don't mind. So we have 3 WBC title fights, which is one of the nice things too about this promotion. The WBC, which is obviously very well known for boxing, is now sanctioning Thai boxing as well. And while we have our own championship belts, the WCK belts, we also have a promotion that we also have a sanctioning body that's been running for a long time called the IKKC, which is the title belt that I won in 2003. We're now also offering WBC belts, which is kind of exciting for a lot of fighters since it's the same belt. You've seen Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya. I could go on forever, So we're going to have 3 WBC title fights. My screen just keeps popping away. It just keeps wanting to turn on me. Anyway, we also will have a 4-man young gun tournament, which will be the 4 up-and-coming stars that we've picked, and they will be fighting tournament style to eventually get into the rankings. We'll also be publishing our rankings on August 8th. And so some of those WBC fights, we have the champions in line already, but we'll be putting the number one contenders into those slots as soon as the rankings come out. That fight will also be available on pay-per-view, and we'll have links for the pay-per-view at the WCK Muay Thai site, as well as on my Instagram, which is my name, Chris Reilly, MMA. Obviously, the MMA comes from my time of coaching MMA fighters. That was when Instagram was born, and I feel like changing the name now doesn't make sense.
Too much trouble,
right? Too much confusion. But all the information will be there on both of our Instagrams. We'll probably be posting some fights afterwards on YouTube, but we want to make sure everyone gets a chance to see them live. We only charge $19.99 for the pay-per-view. The fights will sell out quickly, so if you are in the area, I suggest going to the WCK website and purchasing a ticket quickly. We were out of tickets literally 30 minutes after we put them up for sale on the 25th. But yeah, that's really like what I'm excited about. And I appreciate you giving me the chance to mention it and promote it. It was fun talking with you. I really appreciate you having me as a guest. And I wish you so much luck with this podcast. I hope it really takes off. I think it's an incredible concept. I had fun. I think you took it kind of easy on me on the relationship questions, and I appreciate that. But I tell you what, if you ever want me back, I'm always available. And if you have any questions left, I'm still here and willing to answer them.
Nice. I appreciate it. I do just want to say I did watch the fights a couple weeks ago, and they were amazing. So yeah, if anybody likes MMA or UFC, give this a try. It's totally worth it. It gave me my fix of watching fighters. So I am going to let you off the hook with any more questions for now. I know you gave us your Instagram. Any other places, if people want to reach out, if they want to know more about Chris, anywhere else they can go, or just hit you up on Insta?
At my age, managing more than one social media channel has been a real challenge. Trying to get a TikTok going, it's like, oh my God. Unfortunately, I fought in an era where, there were no cell phones on cameras. And since I fought mostly overseas, I did not get a lot of my fight tapes. I'm working on getting, certainly the times that I fought for WCK, he's just going through all those fights he has with 30 years. I think I will have more up on my YouTube soon, but I think the best place to keep up with me is at my Instagram, which is, again, Chris Reilly MMA. And I'm working hard to keep it fresh and keep it new and show you what I'm doing on a daily basis in the gym, as well as posting some technique videos and some teaching for people who are interested in learning.
We will pop that up on the screen for everybody so they can see it. Definitely follow Chris. Not only does he post some great fighting information, but there's a little bit of style thrown in there as well. So we don't want to miss that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you, and I hope that you have an amazing rest of your day.
Same. Absolutely. Thank you, Claudia. Good luck again. I will be following. I'll be watching your podcast, and I can't wait to see where it goes and who else you have. And I'm, again, really humbled to have been asked, and I just can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Chris. I really hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Chris as much as I did. I really appreciated how he opened up about his relationship struggles and what he's trying to do better now. So remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're available on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.